All right, so obviously we have Christina with us again today, back by popular demand. And we're going to be talking about 1,4-dioxane. So I'm going to let her get into it, but it is one of the contaminants that we don't really talk about too much at Hydroviv. And Christina is going to kind of get into why that is. It was kind of out of the media, back in. And so we just wanted to make sure that if you live in an area where 1,4-dioxane is really prevalent, that we can talk directly to you and you can have a better understanding of what this contaminant is, and everything you need to know about the safety of it and how to remove it, XYZ. So let's get into it. What is 1,4-dioxane, Christina?
Okay, so 1,4-dioxane is a synthetic chemical. So it was synthesized. It's man-made. It doesn't exist in nature. And in my research, it said it was first synthesized in 1863.
Oh.
So it's been around a long time. And then the chemical structure is actually kind of cool. I won't put it up, but I wish I had my organic chemistry kits from before so you'd be able to see it. But it's a cyclic ether. So there's two oxygens and then it just forms a hexagon. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But the reason it's used is it's a solvent or a stabilizer when making other chemicals. So they use it in a lot of things. They don't use it as its own thing.
Okay.
So you'll find it in things like paint strippers, dyes, greases, antifreeze, de-icing fluids, and also consumer products like deodorants, shampoos, and cosmetics. And you won't see in the ingredients 1,4-dioxane, but what you might see is that it's a byproduct or a low-level contaminant in things like polyethylene glycol or PEG, which sometimes you'll see that as a surfactant or something like something that allows your shampoo to not separate, the different components of the shampoo. And so detergents, foaming agents, emulsifiers, and solvents. So if it uses polyethylene glycol, there may be some 1,4-dioxane associated contamination, but it wouldn't be in there as a separate ingredient.
Okay. So if you go to your, bathroom cabinet right now and try to look for 1,4-dioxane, you won't find it.
You won't find it
It's
listed
hidden.
as a separate
Okay.
item. No.
Okay.
But it is used in combination. It is used as an associated chemical in a lot of the manufacturing. So apparently bench scientists use it. It's used to purify pharmaceutical ingredients. How I first heard about it is many, many years ago, I worked for a company that made filters, like microporous membranes. And they actually used 1,4-dioxane in its manufacturing process. And that actually caused a very big problem later on, but we can get to that later. But yeah, so it's found associated with a lot of things, but you won't necessarily find it by itself.
Okay. Cool. Well, not cool, but interesting.
Right. It's interesting in a concerning way.
Yeah. So I guess, why do we care about 1,4-dioxane in these products? And we'll get to it in a second in regards to drinking water, but why should we care? Are there health impacts associated with 1,4-dioxane? Like what do we need to know about how it affects our bodies?
Well, so there's two forms of 1,4-dioxane. There's the airborne form, and then there's also the form that is in drinking water. And so they do know, and I just had my notes. Where are my notes? 1,4-dioxane poses a cancer risk when it's released into the air and people breathe it. And this is according to the EPA, that it's regulated as a hazardous air pollutant. So they do have more studies. They do have information on 1,4-dioxane as being hazardous when it's airborne. But it doesn't stay around in the air. It degrades in the atmosphere. And then it's very miscible in water. It's highly soluble, and it's been found in groundwater. And because it's so soluble, it disperses in the water very, very quickly. And
Okay.
it's also very hard to remove. So I know we'll get to that
Yeah.
in a little bit. But yeah, so it is once again, the EPA has indicated that 1,4-dioxane is a likely human carcinogen, and it has been found in groundwater sites throughout the US. So, they know it's there. They think it's going to cause issues in groundwater, but it's kind of interesting. It's also considered, it's on the list of contaminants. I think it's on the 4th list of emerging contaminants.
Yeah.
But then they just finished doing a risk assessment, and their risk assessment says that they don't think there's health risks in the water of 1,4-dioxane in the water. So it's like, they're kind of talking on both sides, which is a little concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's like a common thing that we see with a lot of these emerging contaminants is that like there's a reason that they're on that list in the first place. And it's because that there's like some associated harm with exposure to them.
Exactly.
And then there's this whole process that EPA has to go through to determine if it's something they want to regulate or, so on and so forth. So yeah, it's kind of like disappointing in a way that like it made it that far and then, no regulation, or EPA then determines, oh, it's actually okay. Whatever it is, we don't need to get into that. But it is
right.
That,
I found their wording from their risk evaluation. This is from December 2020.
Okay.
And the risk evaluation shows there are unreasonable risks to workers and occupational non-users from 13 conditions of use. So that's if you're working directly with the 1,4-dioxane, there's definitely risks, and they admit to those. But EPA found no unreasonable risks to the environment, consumers, bystanders, or the general population, which is a really general statement.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
And like, yeah, with those kind of open-ended statements, like we don't know in 5-10 years if this could entirely change. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. Okay, so to sum up that section, EPA has considered it a likely human carcinogen, but it's not regulated in drinking water, and that's basically where the regulation stops, or where like the EPA's involvement in this contaminant would stop.
Right, because there are no federal maximum contaminant level. There is no MCL, maximum contaminant level, at the federal level. Even though the U.S. National Toxicology Program has indicated that the compound is reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen. Reasonably anticipated. Now, that's once again, it's a very broad, because there's, once again, you can breathe it in or you can take it in through the groundwater. Yeah. Obviously, you can't do actual human studies on this. They have done some studies using rats, I believe, and they have found health issues. So definitely something to be concerned about.
Yeah. Okay. So we know what it is. We know that it's an ingredient in solvents and a lot of other, it's like an additive, but it's not standalone. So how does 1,4-dioxane enter drinking water?
Okay, that's a good question. Most of it ends up coming into the waters from leaking underground storage tanks at hazardous waste sites. Or, they just have the waste, and then, back in the 60s, they were using it and they didn't necessarily know any better. So even following the regulations of the time, you could store waste in just these big ponds and stuff. And then over time, they said, oh, maybe this isn't such a good idea when you find that the stuff leaks. And because this is such a highly soluble liquid, or the highly soluble chemical, the soil doesn't hold on to it. it goes right between, you know, the grains of soil or whatever, straight into the groundwater.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain types of geology that also makes it much more easy to spread out.
Mm.
And there's two parts of the country that apparently have had 1,4-dioxane contamination that has, you know, gotten people to take notice. And one is in Ann Arbor, Michigan, my old hometown, go blue. But the problem was that the leaking ended up getting into the groundwater. And then because of the way the geology worked in the aquifers, once it hit the aquifers, the plumes just started spreading very quickly. And it's been a problem ever since. It's been decades. And it's still, you know, they still haven't really come to a very good resolution. I mean, there's lots and lots and lots of stuff written about it. And the people who are living in that part of Ann Arbor, they can't drink their well water. So a lot of them have gotten hooked up to the municipal system, or, you know, that's something they're also talking about. But it is a problem with people who are using groundwater in that area, because there's just, at the well level, there's just no good way to take it out. And the plumes are still moving. They're still moving around. The other part of the country is actually in Long Island, and the article that I read said that the geology is very similar.
Mm-hmm.
So the what do they call it? Glacial outwash aquifer. And that type of geology just really lends itself to the plumes spreading out in every direction.
Yeah. And I think, like, with other contaminants that we've talked about, like PFAS, that are soluble in water or hydrophobic, they travel long distances through groundwater, through, you know, soils. So if there's a leak at one of these underground storage tanks, you know, 10 miles away from a drinking water source, easily that could travel into that groundwater aquifer over time.
Exactly.
Without people really even being aware. So, yeah.
And that's actually, those two examples are not the only way that 1,4-dioxane can enter the water. There's been a couple recent news articles where wastewater plants, sewage treatment plants were concerned, because once again, we talked about the shampoos and soaps and polyethylene glycol. And so each of us, you know, when we use shampoo, that's a minimal amount of 1,4-dioxane. But when we're talking about an entire community, and then you add in, say, hospital laundries or hotels, or, you know, all of that concentrates at the sewage treatment plants. And so there have been instances where they've had very high effluent of containing 1,4-dioxane. So that's another way that it's of concern. And once it's in the water, it is considered a forever chemical, like PFAS. It's likely to stay there. It doesn't break down. It's soluble in water. So there's no way to stop it from moving with the water.
Yeah. Okay, so this next question, I think it's important to definitely acknowledge, because when we're talking about these really harmful contaminants that are really prevalent in water, you might assume that it's something that you can, like, see, taste, or smell. Like, you might assume, oh, this contaminant might make my water discolored or might make it taste bad. But I'm guessing, like, that 1,4-dioxane is similar to other contaminants where that's not the case.
Exactly. I looked for the chemical information, and they do have that in, you know, for most chemical classifications. So 1,4-dioxane is a colorless, clear liquid. It is completely miscible in water. So meaning that you won't even see it as, you know, grains of anything. It won't make your water cloudy or anything. The only thing that I read was it has a faint, sweet odor similar to that of diethyl ether. Now, I haven't inhaled diethyl ether recently, so I couldn't tell you what that odor would be, but it is a faint, sweet odor. So my guess is, and that's, you know, in its concentrated form.
Yeah.
So my guess is if it's in your water, you wouldn't be able to tell.
Right.
And there was no data for taste.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, one of those contaminants that can't see, taste, or smell.
Yep.
You know, it's just, this is kind of the same trend that we see with PFAS and
Yep.
arsenic and these really harmful contaminants, is that people have no idea that they're in their water unless, you know, actual testing is being done.
Right, because you can't see, smell, or taste it. It doesn't cause anything because it's so soluble. You don't know it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so final question. Is there a way to remove 1,4-dioxane from drinking water? You know, we've kind of talked about its prevalence in groundwater and some of the negative things that make 1,4-dioxane problematic. But
Right.
is there a way to remove it either at the municipal level or with residential filtration?
There's been studies and there have been evaluations done, and the state of New Jersey actually did one that was quite comprehensive. And there is a municipal level treatment that is currently being tested, I believe, in Long Island. It's called an advanced oxidation process. And so it has to do with irradiating with ultraviolet light and then treating with hydrogen peroxide. And according to this study, it is about up to 99% effective at removing 1,4-dioxane. So it's either ultraviolet light, or it also looks like ozone could be used. Okay. Ozone and hydrogen peroxide. Yeah, so ultraviolet and ozone is another way of doing it. So the advanced oxidation process, there's different ways you can do it, and it's very effective. The downside, it's very expensive. It's not something that can easily be slotted into a system that's already there. Yeah. It would be something they would have to add into it, which is why there are very few municipalities that are currently using it. Unfortunately, there's also some of the other methods that they evaluated. They talked about reverse osmosis and nanofiltration. Mm-hmm. Reverse osmosis is somewhat effective, but they didn't actually give a percentage. They said RO in combination with other filtration methods might be better. Nanofiltration, they only got 46% removal. Granular activated carbon, which is probably the most common form of filtration that we run into. This was a pilot scale study, not at the home level, but I think this was using granulated activated carbon at the municipal level. They said that there was 18% removal. So that's not very effective. They said if you use granulated activated carbon downstream of reverse osmosis, it was 56% effective. So those are methods that are commonly used. Unfortunately, they're not great. The other thing they mentioned was something called, and this, once again, they were talking about at a large municipal level, but a synthetic media sorption unit. So they're basically talking about a type of chemical removal called sorption, where you're adsorbing chemicals onto essentially a carbon block. And this was a specific type of sorption unit. I'm not going to get into the brand name here, but it was up to 99% removal. This was, like I said, at the municipal level, it was very effective, but it's something that, you know, isn't in widespread use. So that's pretty much, those were the main things that they've tested and has been evaluated. And unfortunately, it's just not easy to remove from water.
Yeah. All right. Well,
yeah.
Maybe soon there will be some sort of technology, but
yeah. So we've talked about, you know, can a Brita take it out? Probably not. Yeah. But the problem is, because we don't have national standards for 1,4-dioxane, it's really hard to say, okay, we're going to test it, and then we can say it's this percent effective. So it's really hard to be able to give anybody a definite, this will do the job.
Right.
But we can say that studies are ongoing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we'll wrap up here. Yeah, if you are living in an area, Michigan or New Jersey or Long Island,
Or
it's
even
just,
California,
yeah,
North Carolina, those were areas as well.
yeah, it's just definitely something to be aware of.
Yeah.
And something to just kind of like track over time. Of course, we'll talk about 1,4-dioxane as much as we can, as much as it's in the media on our Instagram and
Exactly.
newsletters and stuff. And so we'll keep you informed with the latest, whether it's regulation or kind of like hotspots.
Right.
But yeah, it's certainly something to be aware of, certainly something to track. And if you have
Now,
any,
I
oh
did
yeah,
want to say one thing, that states, because the at the federal level, there's not been regulation not instigated, established. States have started doing it on their own. New York has actually been the first state to establish a maximum contaminant level for 1,4-dioxane. It's 2 parts per billion in cosmetics. And then at the end of 2023, it's going to go down to 1 part per billion.
okay.
So states are starting to. There are regulatory guidelines in a handful of other states. So, you know, the states are saying we got to do this on our own since it's not really happening.
Yeah.
So just keep, if you're concerned, let your state legislators know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And if you have any questions about 1,4-dioxane, you can DM us on our Instagram. You can also go to hydroviv.com and use our live chat feature. And Christina will probably be the one answering your questions. So she has so much information on 1,4-dioxane, and we're really happy to share it with anyone who's interested. You can also email us at hello@hydroviv.com. Same thing. All of those questions regarding 1,4-dioxane will be kicked over to Christina. So feel free, ask away. We're happy to help. But yeah, so Christina, thank you so much for
You're
this
very welcome.
information. I hope that, it helps people to understand or even just be a little bit more aware of 1,4-dioxane in their drinking water.
Yeah.
So thank you so much,
You're
and we'll
welcome.
see everyone next week. Have a
Sounds
good
great.
one.
Bye.
Bye.
Great week. Be safe, everyone.